Hi, my name is Dodge Landesman, and I'm a student at Emerson College for journalism in graduate school. And lately I've been going to New Hampshire because what I've noticed is when we look at all these candidates with over 20 running, the media often gives us these sound bites. They might be 1 or 2 or 3 minutes of a candidate's speech, but they really don't get to the substance of what they're saying. So I think it's important to actually display these people's full speeches in New Hampshire to not only see what they have to say, but also take a look at as to how they campaign, what their style is. Will they be competitive in general election? That presentation style is also important. So on this particular episode, I decided to focus on Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris, of course, is one of the front runners in the presidential sweepstakes. She's usually in the top 4 or 5 in the polls, so she's certainly getting a lot of momentum. She has a lot of support. She had a town hall recently at Portsmouth, New Hampshire. The place was totally packed. The line lasted literally about 3 blocks long, maybe even 4. It literally was a snake outside the church and almost lasted about a tenth of the city. It was pretty impressive. So there's clearly a lot of support for Kamala. She's clearly one of the front-running candidates. And I kind of came in with an open mind. I had some reservations about Kamala before, about her time as a prosecutor. And I think before looking at this speech, it's important to examine her record and really her quality, at least on paper, as a candidate. And personally, I have some reservations about Kamala. Now, there's a reflexive criticism from many people, especially in the criminal justice advocacy field, that feel that they should never support a prosecutor no matter what if they're running for president. Because if you're a prosecutor, that means you've locked people up, and no matter how progressive you could be, you've put people in jail and you've supported this prison industrial complex and you've supported this institutional racism. So a lot of people think that being a prosecutor, as Kamala was obviously, is an automatic disqualifier. I personally disagree with that. I think if you're a progressive prosecutor, if you've had a clean record, then that's only a good thing. And there's so much potential as to what you can do in the prosecutor's office. Look at the current prosecutor, a district attorney of Philadelphia. This gentleman has come in and created sweeping criminal justice reforms. Thousands of black men who have been innocently locked up have been released because of him. Drug laws, possession laws have been relaxed. Police have received extra racial sensitivity training. So there actually is so much that you can do as a district attorney that could address the prison industrial complex, that could address trying to free up young black men and also young black women who are targeted reflexively by the police. And there are prosecutors in the past who have done exactly that. And then, unfortunately, there are prosecutors like Kamala Harris who have been very worried, understandably, about being reelected, about getting elected to higher office, and about being judged by the voters as a whole as being tough on law and order. And I think, unfortunately, Kamala is in that second category. I don't think it's bad to be a prosecutor. You look at Amy Klobuchar, she was a prosecutor. She has had a much more progressive record, comparatively speaking, than Kamala Harris has. So there is a difference, and Klobuchar has not nearly been as progressive as a prosecutor in Philadelphia, even though she could have. But if you examine her record, it isn't as bad as Kamala's. And I'm not saying that Kamala has been a conservative prosecutor. I'm not saying that Kamala has been anti-criminal justice reform necessarily, or has had a record that is particularly horrific, but she also doesn't have a particularly good record. If you examine Kamala Harris's record as a prosecutor, it's the record of an unremarkable progressive. It's a record of being in one of the most progressive cities in the country and having the opportunity to be a leader and not really taking the helm and not taking that opportunity. If you examine her record, she has withheld evidence in certain cases where innocent people have gone to jail, and she has gone after Backpage. And Backpage was essentially a lifeline in the Village Voice and other local newspapers where sex workers could be able to legally perform their sex work, and they were able to market themselves and make a solid living, as I think any young woman, or any young man has the right to do so. Kamala did not believe that. Now, I understand in terms of sex trafficking, that could be an issue, and legalizing sex work might create an opportunity for the sex trafficking market to explode. But already it's a huge issue, and I think if you put everything above board and you legalize everything and you check people's identification and you check to see if they are registered, if they're getting paid fairly, then you take the cash out of the hands of the pimps, and sex trafficking becomes much less of an issue. So I really don't buy the issue saying, well, for Kamala's defense, saying we need to go after these sex workers because that's how you get to the route of sex slavery and sex trafficking. That is not how you free those people who are victims of sex trafficking. The way to legalize it and to legitimize it and to tax it and then, hey, create more law enforcement to oversee this. So there's a budget, because it's an above board legal service, there's a budget to actually go after traffickers who are not legally participating in the system. That's how you address that. So Kamala Harris's closure of Backpage and her opposition to sex work, to me, in my opinion, makes her anti-feminist and anti-criminal justice reform and anti-civil liberty. So to me, that's a very big issue. You also have to look at a candidate's authenticity. Now, this is more of a superficial issue, obviously. It's not about are you progressive, are you not, but it's how do you connect with voters. And it's been interesting to watch Kamala's rollout. It's been a little bumpy. It's been a little funny, actually. She was on The Breakfast Club on Hot 97 out in New York City. The Breakfast Club, hosted by Charlamagne the God, a known comedian, has had a lot of kind of very fun, informal conversations with the various 2020 candidates running for president. And during that conversation with Charlamagne and with The Breakfast Club, Kamala Harris put her foot in her mouth, I'd say, in somewhat of a significant way. They were asking her if she got high, if she liked to smoke marijuana, even though I should remark, during her time as a prosecutor, she did nothing to loosen those drug rules in California. They were already somewhat looser compared to other states, obviously, but she certainly was not an advocate of legalization of marijuana or even diminishing sentences for people who are nonviolent, who have been victims of the drug war. She has not done that. So she tried to connect to the people and say she got down and she got high in college. And then Charlamagne asked her, what did she listen to when she was in college? And the senator remarked that she would listen to Tupac. Now, they did a fact check, and Tupac's first album, I think, was at least a solid 6 years after Kamala Harris had graduated. So there's no way she could have been listening to Tupac. And what this whole minor debacle boils down to is the senator, I think, has this desperate need to connect with people on a human level and to not seem robotic. Now, I don't think Kamala is robotic. I think she's fun. I think she's charismatic. I think she's relaxed. And I just want to say to the senator, like, just, dude, lead with your personality. You don't have to make up stories about your childhood. You don't have to make yourself seem cooler. You don't have to make yourself seem like you were the cool kid who smoked pot. Who cares? You know, she doesn't have the same roboticism and the same stiffness as Hillary Clinton does, for example. So she doesn't have to worry about that. But for some reason, Kamala is that kind of person where there's this deep paranoia in her soul where she's always nervous if she's saying just exactly the right thing. And since saying this, the situation got even worse. Harris's father spoke to the Associated Press and expressed his shock that his daughter was talking about marijuana usage, and that it also reflected poorly on her heritage. And her father's a little more conservative, I think, than she is. And it's kind of funny because I could imagine the situation, if anybody has ever tried pot before, it's always an awkward moment when your parents confront you after finding out that you smoked weed for the first time. And I could imagine this is that awkward moment for Kamala and her father. Maybe she managed 55 years for her father not to know that she smoked pot. And I think this is literally the first time in Hot 97 that he found out that his daughter consumes marijuana or had consumed marijuana in the past. I can imagine the dad even texted her saying, hey, I just heard you smoke pot. Didn't hear back from her. Hey, if I don't hear back from you, I'm telling AP. And her father told AP. So you have a bit of a hilarious mess with her parents, which tends to happen to candidates. It's certainly not new with Kamala. It's certainly not a big deal. But at the same time, what it does, again, boil down to is that there's this nervousness and this reflexive need to pander that the senator has that I don't think is necessarily there with other candidates. You examine other records about Kamala, she has been progressive in a lot of ways. I think she's been a great U.S. senator. She surely challenged Brett Kavanaugh. She had that fire. And watching her in her speech, she was, I think, dynamic, passionate, heartfelt, sincere, and she displayed these many qualities that she seems to simply fumble with in a one-on-one interview. So she certainly needs to get better with that. When she's with a big audience, she's very much at home, and I think she was a master at this town hall. And not only that, but I think she'll be a master in a debate, and she'll be great in a general. And, you know, I hate to say it, I am Mr. Progressive in criminal justice, Mr. Libertarian in criminal justice, but to have a general election candidate saying I was a tough on crime prosecutor might be very appealing to middle American voters. Now, of course, Kamala is not saying she was a tough on crime prosecutor, but watch, if Kamala gets a nomination, the moment after she's nominated, the moment after she knows that she has clinched that one final delegate to officially seal up that nomination, she's going to start projecting herself as a tough on crime prosecutor. So to me, there's a fundamental trust issue that is lacking with Kamala. The other issue is a lack of a niche, a lack of a specific issue that she has had credibility fighting for. You could you could analyze a lot of these candidates, and you could say they're not progressive enough on X, Y, or Z, but let's take a quick look, and if you look at these candidates, you'll realize at least they have credibility on an issue that is good, on an issue that will be well marketable in a general election, and they spent their entire careers fighting for that issue. For example, let's look at Cory Booker. Cory Booker and marijuana legalization on criminal justice. He might be supportive of Big Pharma, certainly a lot of issues, supporters of big banks, but his heart on criminal justice issue is incredibly authentic, incredibly genuine. His heart in fighting for the full 100% legalization of marijuana, which Senator Harris has not called for, nor has she done anything as prosecutor, has been 100% honest. And he is the pro-criminal justice candidate. You look at Bernie Sanders, Medicare for All before Medicare for All was cool. You look at Jay Inslee, and he advocates for the environment and says that is the most pressing issue of the day. You look at Tulsi Gabbard, and she is progressive on her foreign policy and advocates for anti-foreign intervention. You look at a whole host of these candidates, look at Elizabeth Warren and her advocacy for the consumer and consumers' rights. Again, that's that specific niche issue. And you look at all of these candidates, you look at Pete Buttigieg and looking at taxes for the millennial generation and how will they find employment. You look at Andrew Yang and you look at the universal income and how he was one of the pioneers in that idea. Now, a lot of people are hijacking that, of course, including Buttigieg. You look at Marianne Williamson, where she wants to get to the soul of humanity, get to the soul of America, get to the soul of the voter, and examine our nation's heart and see if we examine our heart, maybe we could examine the policy issues and the reasons that our country is broken. So you look at most of these candidates, and there's a lot I like in most of them. You look at John Hickenlooper. He's Mr. Small Business. He has an idea to actually make small business easier and make it easier for people to invest in their communities. So again, you know, even if you're not necessarily 100% progressive or you're more moderate or you are, at least if there's one issue that you really care about, you could look at one of these 20 candidates and say, yep, that's a candidate. Kirsten Gillibrand as well, for me too. The list goes on and on. It's about 75% of candidates who have a niche issue where they've been talking about it or they've been fighting about it for 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 years, and they have automatic credibility. Maybe they're pretending to be more progressive on certain other issues, maybe they're not, but at least they know what they're talking about and they fight with integrity with an issue that you might care about the most. I don't see Kamala having any of those issues. She was good and progressive in her speech. She talked about her support for the new Green Deal. That's great. She talked about her support for Medicare for All. Great. A little late to the party, but certainly not against that. She did not talk about meaningful criminal justice reform. She talked about institutional racism, but she did not talk about addressing the lopsided arrest of black and brown men in our country. She did not talk about that. So if you talk about the issues and you examine Kamala, she's perfectly progressive in most of them. And she talked about this in her town hall. You talk about gun control, Kamala supports a full ban on assault weapons, as progressive as you could get. You talk about the environment, Kamala supports the new Green Deal. Great, as progressive as you could get. You talk about health care, Kamala supports Medicare for All. A little late to the party, but again, great, as progressive as you get. So it'll be interesting to see if Kamala finds her niche. If she has any credibility to have a niche. I don't see her fighting singularly for a specific amazing progressive issue in her career. She's been a good progressive, but she, again, as I mentioned before, she has not been a remarkable progressive. She has not made any risky moves that might antagonize her to voters in the future for higher office when she was looking at it, or for national office. Kamala has been the progressive who has always played it safe. And personally, I want a progressive that has not played it safe, that has been in opposition to the establishment, like Tulsi or Gabbard, who has fought for criminal justice reform, like Cory Booker, and fought for full legalization of marijuana, like Mr. Booker, who talks about our generational needs, like other candidates aren't talking about, like Pete Buttigieg, who talks about examining our soul and our inner person, that Marianne Williamson is talking about, that other candidates are not talking about. Who's talking about a universal income that Andrew Yang is talking about, that other candidates are talking about. So what is it that's new when you have 20 candidates in the race? What is it that's new that Kamala is bringing to the table? She is a generic, good, compassionate, passionate, solid, progressive Democrat, but she's not that much more. I think people look for something different. And if you examine why Kamala, the mainstream media seems to be very surprised that Senator Harris has not necessarily caught fire with black voters in the state of South Carolina, for example. Because I think there's some racism in the analysis. And the racism is that the mainstream media thinks that black voters reflexively vote for a candidate who happens to share their race. Now, of course, that's a completely understandable part about voting, and that should be a factor. They want to look up to somebody and tell their daughter, hey, you could grow up to be president just like Kamala, for example. And electing somebody who shares your race, of course, helps break the glass ceiling of that institutional racism, which of course are all completely reasonable reasons to vote for somebody of your race. But I think primarily black voters don't vote as black voters, but they vote as human beings. And they want to make sure their children are safe. They want to make sure that their children have an opportunity for higher education, for a career. They want to make sure that if their children are looking for summer jobs in their youth, that it's a solid wage, where they can be off the streets and have enough to have a comfortable enough life. They want to make sure that if their parents are sick, that they have the health care and they have the capability to take care of their parents. They want to make sure that their son is safe, if he's teenage and of color, that their son is safe and not at risk of getting shot by a police officer simply for smoking a joint, or really simply for just standing in a specific location. Kamala has not addressed those issues. She did not address criminal justice reform in her speech. Again, she addressed healthcare, great. She addressed the environment. She did address institutional racism, but she did not address harsh sentencing. She did not address marijuana legalization. She did not address black business empowerment. So if you look at all the niche candidates and everything they stand for, is it that surprising that black voters are voting for Bernie Sanders? Because I think a lot of black voters have felt kept down by the Democratic establishment. They felt that their vote has been taken for granted by the establishment, not by the Democratic Party, because they fought for a lot of good ideals, but by the establishment. And I think if you examine what's the most important issue today, it's criminal justice reform. And if you examine what issue is most possible for dramatic reformation starting day one, if a Democratic president takes office, it's criminal justice reform. Because you have a strong cadre, the Rand Pauls and the Justin Amash's of the world, of libertarian legislators who are also incredibly pro-criminal justice reform. So I don't know. I think you need a Booker or a Gabbard or somebody who really knows what they're talking about on that issue and feels it in their heart to really create meaningful change. Kamala is the establishment pick when it comes to criminal justice reform. She will not change the prison industrial complex. She will not rock the boat. And business owners, corporate owners who profit from that feel safe with Kamala. Up front, she's a black candidate. She talks about smoking weed. Isn't she cool? Deep down, they know that she is in their pocket and that she will not rock the boat. And then you wonder why she has raised so much cash. You also wonder why Kamala is not one of the candidates, again, unlike Booker, unlike Warren, unlike Kirsten Gillibrand. Kamala is not one of the candidates who has said she will not accept outside PAC money. And I wonder why. Unfortunately, she is too conservative. She's not hardcore conservative. She's progressive in an obvious way for San Francisco. But she is too conservative for me with her record as a prosecutor. And she hasn't addressed any of her shortcomings as a prosecutor. That's another issue. She's explained them away. She's been incredibly flippant. She hasn't said, like Tulsi with her LGBT votes, for example, or Kirsten Gillibrand with her more conservative votes, she hasn't said, I'm sorry, this is how I messed up. I talked with a certain amount of people. I've educated myself on this issue, and I'm going to change for the future and be that more progressive person, and I understand where I went wrong. Kamala has not said that. So she's not trying to pretend she is more progressive than she is, but she's not progressive on criminal justice reform. Again, another issue, she's great. And I'll wrap up by saying it's a tough one for me because I don't like her very much. I don't like her policy. I don't like her record. But whoa, can she give a speech? Can she get people to their feet? Can she rile them up? She is reminiscent of Obama. You know, I think the coolness factor, she's not as cool as Obama. The coolness factor is way more force with Kamala. But she has that same soaring oratory, that same urgency in her voice, where she can get people to their feet, inspired, and say, wow, this person cares. I don't really know if she does or not. That's a big question, but she is sure of a hell of a great performer, and you need a good performer to go up against the ultimate performing clown, the President of the United States. So I do hope you enjoy the speech. The first bits of the speech, the camera isn't as good. Then I got a lot closer for the time that she started answering questions, which obviously is the most important time where she addresses Medicare and she addresses a lot of these issues. So thank you so much for watching, and please enjoy.
My background includes, and Speaker Terry told you, part of my background is I was a prosecutor for many years. I prosecuted everything, including homicides. I believe this is a moment in time to restore truth and justice. And so let's take a look at where we are. It's an inflection point. We're at an inflection point in the history of our country, and actually in the world. This is a moment in time that is requiring each of us, and collectively, to look in the mirror and ask this question, who are we? And I believe part of the answer to that question is, we are better than this. We are better than this. Requiring us to fight for the best of who we are, and fight for those principles behind that word justice. So let's take a look in the mirror and see where we have been. It is not justice to have a system where you give a $1 trillion tax credit to the top 1% and the big corporations of America. That is not justice. It is not justice when we separate babies from their mothers and fathers at the border. That values civil society, that we do not pass gun safety laws because of fear of lobbyists. Instead of understanding that our values should be about protecting our babies when they go to school, protecting people where they worship, and understanding that we should never bow down to those who have a lot of money because we are afraid that we may not win re-election when people are dying in our streets. You know, I think we all know right now, there are a lot of folks who rightly are feeling quite distrustful of their government and its institutions and leaders. And the thing about a relationship of trust is this. The very nature of a relationship of trust is such that it is a reciprocal relationship. You give and you receive trust. And one of the most important ingredients in trust is truth. But there's a funny thing about truth. Speaking truth often makes people quite uncomfortable. And for those of us who have these microphones and stand behind podiums, there is an incentive that when we speak, everyone will feel lovely and they will applaud and we'll sprinkle lovely dust all over the room and everyone will have had a good day and job will have been done. Well, speaking truth Doesn't always accomplish that goal, does it? But here's the other thing about speaking truth, which we all know. Yes, people may walk away from that conversation thinking, I don't particularly like what I had to hear. But they will also walk away from that conversation knowing it was an honest conversation. So let's speak some truth as we attempt to restore trust. So you're looking at me, okay, Kamala, what do you have in mind? Okay, let's speak truth. Let's speak truth that America right now is not working for working people. And I'll tell you how I know that. When we know that almost half of families in America cannot afford a $400 unexpected emergency, then it will pull them in a spiral. We know we must speak truth that America right now is not working for working people. When we know that in our country today, in 99% of the counties in the United States, if you are a minimum wage worker working full-time, you cannot afford market rate for a one-bedroom apartment. We know America's not working for working people, which in fact is why I propose that we change the tax code to reflect the needs of working people, and in particular, as it relates to working families that are making less than $100,000 a year, I propose that they get a tax credit such that they get to collect $500 a month to be able to meet the cost of living. Because we have to recognize, some people want to walk around touting, oh, the economy is great, the economy is great. Well, let me tell you, Terry, and you know what I'm talking about. I've been traveling this country talking to folks. I'm meeting folks who they're saying, yeah, you can talk about the unemployment numbers, I'm working 2 or 3 jobs. People talk about, yeah, I'm working, but my wages aren't meeting the cost of living, of gas, of rent, of utilities. We've got to speak these truths. Let's speak the truth. Let's speak the truth about education. We're a society that pretends to care about education. Not so much the education of other people's children. Let's speak that truth. To put the resources into our public education system, and instead we are putting tons of money into a system of mass incarceration because we are not being smart about investing in the future of our country. Let's speak these truths. And meanwhile, we have an administration that puts in place a head of the Department of Education that talks more about grizzly bears than she does children who need resources. And is trying to privatize the public education system of this country. Let's speak these truths. Let's speak the truth that in this country today, many, if not most, American families are just short of bankruptcy because of an inability to pay a hospital bill. Let's speak that truth. And that the truth also is that health care and access to health care should not be a privilege, it should be a right. And let's speak one of the most important truths that at this particular time must be spoken when we have such powerful forces that are trying to sow hate and division among us. The most important truth that I believe we must know in our heads and in our hearts is the vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us. Let's speak that truth. And I know that to be true. I know that to be true. Listen, we are a beautifully diverse country, right? I mean, just look at the weather right outside that window and imagine what it's like in Hawaii right now. We have all kinds of diversity, of religion and race and ethnicity and topography and industry, and we could go on and on. We diverse country. And some would suggest that within diversity, it is not possible to achieve unity. Oh, there's so many differences. How can we achieve unity? Well, I'll tell you this. The way we achieve unity is by understanding that yes, we are diverse, and we have so much more in common than what separates us. I saw it with survivors around the Kavanaugh hearing, who by the hundreds, most of whom had never told their story to anyone, and had the courage and the conviction to travel to our nation's capital, believing that if they were heard, it would matter. There is an incredible amount of power in the people of our country. They're going to look in our eyes, and they're going to ask us, where were you at that inflection moment? And what we're going to be able to say is, we were all hanging out in this church together. And our answer to that question is going to be so much more than just how we felt at this moment. Our answer is going to be what we did, what action we took, that we stood up, we stood out, we stood, we marched, we shouted, we did everything we can to fight.
So I hear a lot every day about how the Democratic Party has become a party of the coasts. And I also hear at the same time people telling me that we have to have, they're more concerned than ever about a candidate coming out of the Democratic primary that can actually win in the general election. So my question is, what will your campaign look like, and how will you reach your message to the heartland of our country?
Well, for starters, I plan on prosecuting the case against people who do not tell the truth and who are purveyors. And that case will be successfully prosecuted. Because there's a lot of evidence of injustice and a lack of truth and a lack of commitment to work with people. It is also going to be a matter of understanding that back to the commonalities.
Yeah, this is a pretty perfect show.
You know, I reject the notion that depending on where you were born, you don't identify with or care or connect with someone else. I believe that ultimately this election is going to come down to who the American public believes will be a leader. And a leader in a way that also understands that power is about understanding and caring and having an interest in the lives of people other than oneself. And ultimately, my experience having run an office of almost 5,000 people as Attorney General, the work I've done in the United States Senate, and the work that I know needs to happen around really restoring America's role and standing on the globe is going to be critically important. I'm prepared to do that.
There's a mic coming right to you.
Hi, thank you for taking my question, and thank you for talking about the truth. That's refreshing, and I was especially happy to hear you talking about Medicare for all. I want to tell you, I have a 14-year-old son who has a life-threatening disability, and he requires medication that he carries with him everywhere he goes all the time, and has since he was 2 and will for the rest of his life. And we've had the experience of drug companies raising the prices on that medication to the point where families who need it for their child's survival can't afford it. And so I'm wondering if you would consider co-sponsoring Senate Bill 102, the drug company pricing bill that will protect consumers from drug companies doing exactly this, and abusing their monopolies by taking patents away from drug companies when they exploit their consumers in this way, and particularly when they charge Americans 10 times more than they're charging people in other countries for the exact same medication, because it would make me feel safer for my son in this
specifically on that piece of legislation, but first of all, I thank you for having the courage to tell your story. I think more people need to understand and see you, and parents like you, and individuals like you, and understand what it really means to go through the healthcare system in this country. Because far too many people, I think, are playing political games with it and really don't understand what it is like to be an individual who needs health care, or be the family member and loving of someone who needs to go through the system. And I'll just share with you my personal experience. My mother, who raised us, passed away a few years ago after having cancer. And my mother was a ferocious woman who, after you met her, you would have thought she was 7 feet tall, but actually she was 5 feet. And she was actually a breast cancer researcher and had two goals in her life: to raise her two daughters and breast cancer. And she got it, and she ended up having cancer. And going through that system with her, you know, I will never forget meeting a nurse who said, "Has anyone talked to you about anticipatory grief?" And I had never heard the term, but it explained everything. When you're going through the healthcare system with someone who's facing an acute illness, and you're already grieving their departure, you don't realize it. You're going through a process of hoping that your son is not in pain, of monitoring the reaction that someone has to the medication they're being given, to making sure that the medical health professionals who are treating them are on top of their needs and are responding to the feedback they're giving. Making sure and trying to figure out how you can be creative and giving them something that they might actually be able to eat or want to eat because they don't have an appetite. Worrying about just physically where they will be when they're out of the hospital, when they're in the hospital. And for people to have to go through that is an incredible emotional, physical, I don't want to say burden, it's what you do. But it's very difficult. And then on top of that, to require people to have to worry about how they're going to pay that bill, that is not the sign of a civil society. We didn't have, my mother had Medicare. So that was not our concern. It is the concern of so many people in the system. And a contributor to that is the pharmaceutical companies. Crisis in America today. These pharmaceutical companies were pushing this drug, knowing of its side effects and not appropriately informing the public. Let's talk about how they've been gouged, the public has been gouged in terms of any drugs that can actually help people through recovery. The system is immoral. Because the way that it is working right now, and the way pharmaceutical companies are working right now, for the most part, it is clear their motivation is profit, not public health. And it's immoral. It's immoral when you're talking about health. And so Medicare for All, one of the reasons I support it is because when it would be achieved, we would be able to negotiate on behalf of all of us against the pharmaceutical companies, which means that we would be able to bring down prices and have more influence around, to your point, what we also need, which is to have greater access to generics and not have pharmaceutical companies shut down competition because they're afraid that competition obviously means that the prices would go down and the quality might go up. So I'm all on board with that, and I just want to thank you for telling your story.
I am an ACLU voter, and I care about civil rights and civil liberties. My question is, would you commit to passing a modern Voting Rights Act that would incentivize states to adopt same-day and automatic voter registration and expand early and mail-in voting opportunities and make election day national.
Absolutely. Contribute to your point. In the 2018 election cycle, we saw massive voter suppression taking place. Remember, so 2013, the United States Supreme Court in Shelby v. Holder gutted the Voting Rights Act. It had only been around like 50 years. And remember that part of what it gutted was that provision that recognized certain states had a history of voter suppression and therefore should be monitored. And it removed the requirement, basically, of monitoring those states. And guess what happened almost immediately after that case came down? Something like 20-something states, their legislatures, put in place voter restrictions. To the point that one, there was a case out in North Carolina, was challenged because it was so obviously restricted. The Court of Appeal said, and I'm going to quote these words, the Court of Appeal said that the law that they put in place was so outrageous that it, and then here's the quote, with surgical precision attempted to dissuade black voters from voting. We saw it in 2018 around Native American voters. We saw it in 2018 around students. It is voter suppression happening across and intimidation happening across our nation. So I absolutely support it, but I would also say this to all of the leaders here. 2020, we're not only going to see these attempts happen again, and so let's be prepared for it, right? Because we'll litigate. The ACLU does an extraordinary job, so does the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, so many great organizations, Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. We'll litigate it, but it'll pretty much, unless we get injunctions, it'll be after the fact. What we also have to do as organizers is think about how we will, and start doing it now, how we're going to try and make it as easy as possible for our neighbors around the country to vote, because we can guarantee there will be suppression. And then the second point I want to make is this, to your point about 2016. The other voter manipulation is Russia. Let's get ready. Let's get ready for that. Because we have the tools, sadly, because we've been used to voter suppression in the part of the word, the classic way. This is a whole other thing. In fact, I have a bill, it's a bipartisan bill, with a Republican from Oklahoma, his name is James Lankford. He and I both are the only two members of the United States Senate to have served on Homeland Security and Senate Intelligence at the same time. And we have a bill that basically would require states to upgrade their elections infrastructure, because guess what? Going like back to the future, the best and smartest way to conduct voting, paper ballots. Paper ballots. Russia can't have a piece of paper. But we also have to pay attention to that contemporary, the latest version of what's going to happen around attempting to manipulate the American public as we vote. But absolutely, count me in. There has been an erosion of labor and organized labor. We've seen it in states like Wisconsin and others, because there are powerful interests that know that when working people unite, especially around collective bargaining, that working people win. And there are some who unfortunately have decided that it's a zero-sum game, not understanding that when working people win, America wins. That when working people have the wages and benefits commensurate with the value they perform, that it uplifts families and communities and all of society. And we have challenges, you're right, because there has been a wholesale attack on organized labor. And we've seen it in particular out of this administration. I will always stand with labor. Listen, organized labor brought us the 5-day work week. Today's holiday, we have right? Sick leave, we don't get to have family family paid leave like we should, but we're working on that. But we all, any working person, owes a debt of gratitude to organizing events. And it is within our power to do something about it. Because, I mean, let's all be clear, we're not talking about a meteor that might hit the planet. We're talking about human behaviors that are contributing directly to greenhouse gas emissions. We are talking about human behaviors that are resulting, you know it here in this region, to what we need around clean drinking water, what we need in terms of our need as human beings to breathe clean air. And we are at a moment where we are about to throw away the future of our planet for our children and grandchildren. It is an immediate threat, and we have to understand this with a great sense of urgency. And I will tell you, I find it absolutely outrageous and on the just absolute malpractice that this administration would have you buying science fiction instead of science fact. That they're in their hands and trying to feed big coal and big oil instead of understanding what is in the best interest of the people on this planet. And our role of leadership, and we have, by the way, not even begun this evening, to talk about how we are ceding our position among our neighbors around the globe on so many issues, including this. It's outrageous. I am supporting the Green New Deal. That requires us to have goals and think about what we can achieve and put metrics on it. Some of them we'll achieve, some of them we won't. But if we don't aspire, this is gonna be a bad ending. And I hate to sound this way, I don't want to sound like an alarmist, but it is very real and it is within our power. You know, California and so many states, we've seen at a state level, it makes a difference. But this is a challenge of whether or not they're going to be leaders. And clearly we don't have a leader in the White House on this. And just like you can go into an emergency room anywhere and get care, you should be able to walk into a treatment facility and receive care. And what we know is that when we're looking at everything from suicide rates to what we're looking at in terms of drug addiction, there is a direct connection between either the presence and resources into those areas of treatment or not, and what those other outcomes can be that are lethal and fatal. And when I think about it, I also understand that part of the challenge that we have as a country is that we have not done enough to put resources into creating incentives for more people to go into those professions, and we have not done an adequate job of creating incentives for those professionals wherever they are to come to remote areas of our country, rural areas of our country, which have some of the highest need for that kind of treatment. And we've also failed in terms of reimbursement rates. I know some great work has happened here in New Hampshire, but we have failed to give good reimbursement rates. And so also, there's just, it sometimes doesn't make financial sense for the profession to be in those areas where there otherwise are not large populations. And that's a failing of our system because those are also the hot spots in terms of the need and the demand for the kind of services that should be provided. So it's very much a priority for me, and I think we can actually do something about it. And also going back to when we talked about Medicare for All, we would have to tweak into that system how we would think about where we're creating incentives for mental health professionals to live and work. And then my final point would be, I can go on and on, also telemedicine. We should always realize that with, there are bad aspects of technology and good aspects of technology. The bad aspects is that, it's stealing our privacy, we gotta deal with that. But the benefit of technology, an example of the benefit, is telemedicine, which which mental health professionals and medical professionals are agreeing is a way to get services to remote areas or to rural areas that otherwise don't have service providers in those places.
I'm currently a junior in college, but I'm also one of 10.2 million documented immigrants who are not affected by DACA. My question for you is, I know, a lot of questions speak about, dreamers and how you're going to protect them and how you're going to, how they bring so much to this country, but I'm more worried about my parents and unaccompanied minors and, people who are fleeing violent war zones and, nobody talks about that. And I want to know, what you're going to do to protect them and to protect other students like me, but more importantly, those who have been here for years, who nobody really, ever listens to.
We're listening to you. So you're absolutely right. And first of all, the issue of immigration is not a monolith. To the point of your question, there are a lot of very specific subsets under that head that have to be addressed and understood, including those young people like yourself who do not receive DACA protection and are here, obviously living a productive life, contributing and identifying in a way that is about wanting to stay and wanting to be protected. And I'll say this, first of all, we've got to pass comprehensive immigration reform. And it's not only about a goal, there's no path right now for undocumented immigrants towards citizenship. There's no path. So we have 11, 12 million people. There's an argument about which. Go with 11. 11 million people for which there's no real path. So it is irresponsible to not come up with a plan. And there have been bipartisan agreements, but this administration is not going to sign any of them. Because we have a president of the United States who has created a fiction about a crisis at the border, and he's held up the United States government as workers around a zombie project called the law. That we have to get our act together. We have to pass comprehensive immigration reform. I think the point you made about parents of DACA students and young people is really critically important. I was in those rooms, and it was a fight to say, look, this is not really about who you decided is kind of the poster child for, aberration. These children have parents who love them. And we should not have a policy that says, oh, so we're gonna take care of those kids, but not the parents that are raising them? That's just wrong. And so the point also is that the policy has to understand that they have parents who work hard, who love them, and there should also be a plan for their parents, because otherwise we're talking about a policy that will again separate children from their parents. Can you imagine any one of us with our college-age kid, and the policy is the kid can stay here and you've got to go away? That's not right. So you're absolutely right to raise this subject. And when we think about comprehensive immigration reform, there must also be a plan for the parents of our young people, and understanding that it would not be civil and it would be wrong and it would not be something any one of us would want, which is a policy that says the kid can stay and the parents have to leave.
Oh, I'm sorry. Trying to screw over.
My husband Ken passed away in November 2017 after 12 and a half years of living with never onset Alzheimer's disease. While my mother was living with us at the time, she was diagnosed 7 years ago with Alzheimer's. She's 92. My sister was diagnosed with Alzheimer's last month. So
no question that we have not done enough in terms of also supporting what needs to happen around research, NIH funding. This administration, for example, has made it one of the lowest priorities. And we have to have a public health system in this country that values public research for public health issues, as opposed to research motivated by who's paying. So it is a matter of research. And again, the incentives in terms of the medication. And I've had extensive conversations with folks about this. I'd be interested in your thoughts. Maybe we can follow up. But also about the incentives or lack of incentive for research around medication as it relates to Alzheimer's patients. And really, frankly, part of the issue is that we are not doing enough from a public health perspective in creating good government incentives around an aging population, just as a general matter. And so to your point, we're stuck in decades-old research and approaches and protocols instead of upgrading it. So it is very much on my radar. NIH is a big part of what I think we need to do. And then, as a general matter, what we need to do more of in terms of public health policy as it relates to seniors. And understanding that their lives are extended, but with health needs that are not being met because the model is based on a different, range of life, frankly. And I'll actually add to that point on the opioid crisis. What we're not talking about now I'm going to jump into that subject. We're not talking about the number of seniors who are medicated and prescribed opioids to deal with the pain of aging.
How it was constructed, but how do you hope Americans touch back to their values?
Thank you, thank you for everything you said. Part of it is I strongly believe reminding us that we have more in common than what separates us, and operating from that perspective. Operating from the perspective, use the example of gun violence. Operating from the perspective of that mother or father that lost their child, and this is an all too common experience wherever that parent may be, literally thinking about and looking up bulletproof backpacks. Oh yeah. That parent having to answer questions when the kid comes home about the drill they had at class, which taught them to run into a closet and be quiet and turn down their cell phone if there's a shooter in the classroom. The commonality between the parent who lost their child in that mass shooting and the mother or father who is living in a city where gun violence is the leading cause of Black and brown men in that community, and understanding the commonality of their experience of loss of their child, and bringing communities together, understanding we have so much more in common than what separates us. I don't think that we have lost our values. I think we need a resurgence and a reminder of the fact that we all, at our kitchen table, in the middle of the night, when we are looking at our children or our grandchildren, we have the same values. But I think it's a matter of also agreeing and declaring that we're operating from the same place and not buying into the idea that it's us versus them and that we have nothing in common. And then we have to act on our values. To your point about gun violence, and you mentioned the CNN town hall, so you may have seen it and heard me say it there, but I'll say it again here. The failure to act on gun violence in America is unnecessary. We can act, right? We can act. But let's be clear about what the issue is. The issue is not that we're waiting for another tragedy, like the tragedy, to get everybody to do the right thing. Sandy Hook, 26 and 7-year-old babies were slaughtered. We're not waiting for the next tragedy. I was just in South Carolina. I visited Mother Emanuel Church, where they were praying, they were at Bible study, and a gunman comes in and slaughters them. We're not waiting for another tragedy, so that's not it. Well, some people might say, well, we're just waiting for the good idea. We're not waiting for the good idea. We've had all the good ideas. Universal background check. Look, okay, you know what universal background check achievable, but we are going to have to fight, and we cannot give up. Here's the thing. Why, you ask? In the year of our Lord 2019 only, is this happening? And part of it is because people did not want to deal and accept, and most importantly, admit that we are the scene of a crime when it comes to what we did with slavery and Jim Crow and institutional racism. And so, similarly, when it comes to Indigenous Americans, the Indigenous people, there is a lot of work that we still have to do. And I appreciate and applaud your point and your effort and